Stopping near a small hill overlooking the perimeter fence, Emily knelt down beside her dogs, scratching behind their ears affectionately. "You two never cease to amaze me," she murmured softly. "Every day, you remind me why I love doing this job." Titan tilted his head, gazing at her with intelligent eyes, while Shadow leaned into her touch, her tail thumping gently against the ground. In that moment, Emily realized something important. Strength wasn't just about physical power or dominance. It was about trust, patience, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. Those qualities were what truly defined her, not just as a soldier, but as a person. And as long as she had Titan and Shadow by her side, she knew she could handle whatever challenges lay ahead. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared below the horizon, Emily stood up, signaling to her dogs that it was time to head back. Together, the three walked side by side, silhouetted against the darkening sky, a symbol of unity, loyalty, and resilience. For Emily, this was more than just a career, it was a calling. And every day, she was reminded of just how lucky she was to share it with her four-legged partners. In a quiet corner of the countryside, surrounded by rolling hills and dense woods, stood a military base that was home to some of the most disciplined soldiers and their loyal companions. Among them was Sergeant Emily Carter, a woman whose presence commanded respect despite her unassuming appearance. Standing at just 5'4" with a calm demeanor, Emily wasn't someone you'd immediately peg as intimidating. But looks, as they say, can be deceiving. Emily had spent years honing her skills as a K9 handler, working tirelessly to build an unbreakable bond with her two Belgian Malinois, Titan and Shadow. These dogs weren't ordinary pets. They were highly trained military animals capable of performing tasks that would make even seasoned soldiers proud. From tracking suspects to detecting explosives, Titan and Shadow excelled in every mission they were assigned. And yet, when off duty, they were gentle giants, happy to lounge around and play fetch like any other dog. On this particular day, the sun hung high in the sky, casting golden rays over the sprawling fields surrounding the base. Emily decided it was time for her routine patrol near the perimeter fence. It was a task she performed almost daily, allowing her to stretch her legs while giving Titan and Shadow some much-needed exercise. Clad in her standard-issue uniform, boots polished to perfection, Emily walked confidently along the gravel path, her dogs trotting obediently beside her. Titan, the larger of the two, moved with purpose, his muscular frame exuding strength. His ears twitched constantly, always alert for the slightest sound or movement. Shadow, slightly smaller but no less formidable, stayed close to Emily's side, her intelligent eyes scanning their surroundings. Together, the trio made an impressive sight, a picture of teamwork and trust. As they rounded a bend in the trail, the peaceful silence was suddenly shattered by the distant rumble of engines. In the distance, a group of motorcyclists appeared, speeding down the narrow road that bordered the base. Their loud bikes roared like angry beasts, kicking up clouds of dust as they approached. Emily slowed her pace, watching cautiously as the bikers drew nearer. She recognized troublemakers when she saw them, rough-looking men clad in leather jackets adorned with patches, their faces hidden behind sunglasses and unkempt beards. The bikers noticed her too. At first, they seemed content to speed past, but then one of them slowed down, pointing toward Emily and her dogs. The rest of the gang followed suit, pulling over to the shoulder of the road. They parked their bikes and began shouting taunts, their voices carrying across the open space. One man cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled something about how admirable it was to see a woman trying to control such big dogs. Another chimed in, laughing loudly and calling her a petty soldier. Emily clenched her jaw but didn't respond. She knew better than to engage with people looking for a reaction. Instead, she focused on her patrol, keeping her attention on Titan and Shadow. The dogs, sensing her tension, glanced up at her curiously before returning their gaze to the rowdy group. Though they remained calm for now, Emily could feel the energy shifting. If the bikers pushed too far, she wouldn't hesitate to show them exactly what her dogs were capable of. For now, though, she kept walking, determined not to let their mockery distract her from her mission. Little did she know, the situation was about to escalate in ways neither she nor the bikers could have anticipated. The next morning, the base buzzed with energy as soldiers went about their routines. The story of Emily and her dogs had become the talk of the day, weaving its way into conversations during breakfast, training sessions, and even casual encounters in the hallways. Some recounted the tale with dramatic flair, adding details that weren't entirely accurate, like how Titan supposedly leaped 10 feet in the air to scare off the bikers. Others simply marveled at the professionalism Emily displayed under pressure, using it as an example of what true leadership looked like. For Emily, however, life carried on as usual. She woke early, as she always did, and began her day by checking on Titan and Shadow. The two dogs greeted her enthusiastically, tails wagging and eyes bright with excitement. After ensuring they were fed and hydrated, she took them out for a short morning exercise session, letting them burn off some energy before starting their formal training drills. These moments were sacred to Emily, a chance to connect with her partners without distractions or interruptions. During one of the drills later that day, Lieutenant Harris approached her. He had a clipboard tucked under his arm and a thoughtful expression on his face. "Carter," he said, nodding toward her, "I wanted to commend you again for yesterday. Word is spreading beyond the base too. Local law enforcement reached out asking if we could send over your report. Apparently, those bikers caused trouble elsewhere before coming here." Emily raised an eyebrow, surprised but not entirely shocked. "Sir, I'm glad they're looking into it, but I doubt they'll admit to anything. From what I saw, they thrive on intimidation." Harris chuckled dryly. "Maybe so, but sometimes people don't realize how close they came to disaster until someone points it out. Your actions reminded them there are consequences for crossing lines. That's something worth noting." Emily nodded, appreciating the sentiment. She hadn't thought much about the broader impact of the incident, focusing instead on doing her duty. But hearing that her actions might deter the gang from causing trouble elsewhere gave her a sense of satisfaction she hadn't expected. Later that afternoon, while working with Titan and Shadow on obedience exercises, Emily noticed a group of new recruits watching from a distance. They were young, wide-eyed, and clearly fascinated by the precision and discipline displayed by the K-9 unit. One of them eventually mustered the courage to approach her. "Excuse me, Sergeant Carter," he asked hesitantly, his voice tinged with nervousness. "Yes," Emily replied, turning to face him. Titan sat calmly by her side, his presence alone enough to make the recruit take a step back. "I just wanted to say thank you," the young man stammered. "We've been hearing about what happened yesterday, and, well, it made me realize how important it is to stay focused and professional, no matter what. You really showed us what it means to lead by example." Emily smiled faintly, touched by the sincerity in his words. "Thank you for saying that," she said. "But remember, it's not just about me. It's about teamwork. Titan and Shadow are as much a part of this as I am. Without them, none of it would have been possible." The recruit nodded earnestly, glancing at the dogs with newfound admiration. "Yes, ma'am. I'll keep that in mind." As the day wore on, Emily found herself reflecting on the ripple effects of the encounter. It wasn't just about teaching the bikers a lesson. It was about inspiring others within her own ranks. Seeing the recruits look up to her reignited a sense of purpose she sometimes forgot she had. Being a role model wasn't something she actively sought, but knowing she could influence the next generation of soldiers filled her with quiet pride. That evening, after finishing her duties, Emily decided to take Titan and Shadow for a leisurely walk around the quieter parts of the base. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the landscape. As they strolled along, she allowed herself to soak in the peacefulness of the moment. Her mind wandered back to the events of the previous day. The taunts, the tension, the way her dogs had responded flawlessly when called upon. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for Titan and Shadow, but for the unique partnership they shared. The bikers, emboldened by their numbers and the noise of their revving engines, began to grow louder and more aggressive in their taunts. One of them, a burly man with a scruffy beard and a leather vest covered in patches, stepped forward. This was Rick, the self-proclaimed leader of the group. He had a smug grin plastered across his face as he leaned casually against the fence that separated the road from the military base. His arms were crossed, and his sunglasses reflected the sunlight, hiding the gleam of mischief in his eyes. "Hey, sweetheart," Rick shouted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What's a little lady like you doing out here with those big, scary dogs? You sure you can handle them?" His words were met with laughter from his friends, who egged him on, clearly enjoying the spectacle they were creating. They exchanged jabs and jokes among themselves, treating the situation like some kind of game. Emily didn't respond. She kept her gaze fixed ahead, her steps steady and deliberate as she continued her patrol. Titan and Shadow stayed close to her side, their ears perked up and their bodies tense. To an outsider, the dogs might have appeared calm, but anyone familiar with K9 behavior would recognize the subtle signs. They were alert, ready to act at a moment's notice. Emily placed a reassuring hand on Titan's back, silently communicating with him. The gesture was small but effective. It reassured the dog that everything was under control for now. Rick wasn't satisfied with being ignored. He straightened up and took a few steps closer to the fence, raising his voice even louder. "Come on, don't be shy," he called out, his tone mocking. "Are those mutts even trained, or are they just for show? Bet they're all bark and no bite." His gang roared with laughter again, slapping each other on the back as if they'd just pulled off some great prank. One of the other bikers chimed in, pointing directly at Shadow. "Yeah, look at that one. It's probably scared of its own shadow." The comment earned another round of chuckles from the group, but it also caused a low rumble to rise from Shadow's throat. The sound was faint, almost imperceptible, but Emily noticed immediately. She gave the dog a gentle nudge with her knee, signaling her to stay calm. Shadow obeyed, though her sharp eyes remained locked on the source of the insult. Rick, oblivious to the warning signs, decided to push things further. He turned to his friends, gesturing dramatically toward Emily and her dogs. "I bet she couldn't catch us if we tried," he declared, puffing out his chest. "These military types always talk big, but let's see what happens when we get closer." His gang nodded in agreement, feeding off his bravado. Encouraged by their support, Rick swung one leg over his motorcycle and dismounted, striding confidently toward the fence. As he approached, he grabbed hold of the chain-link barrier and began climbing it, his heavy boots scraping against the metal. "Hey, Curly," he called out, grinning widely. "Mind if I come say hello to your pups? Maybe they'll listen to me better than you." The rest of the bikers cheered him on, hooting and hollering, as if this were some kind of daredevil stunt. Emily stopped walking. She turned slowly to face Rick, her expression unreadable, but her posture firm. Her hand rested lightly on the leash clipped to Titan's collar, a silent reminder of the power she held at her fingertips. "Sir," she said, her voice calm but carrying an edge of authority, "you're trespassing on restricted military property. I advise you to step back immediately." Rick laughed, clearly unimpressed. "Or what?" he shot back, pausing halfway over the fence. "You gonna call your boss on me? Or maybe sick your little watchdogs?" He smirked, glancing down at Titan and Shadow. "Go ahead, sweetheart. Let's see what they've got." Emily didn't blink. She stood her ground, her focus unwavering. Behind her, Titan and Shadow shifted slightly, their muscles coiled like springs. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. For the first time since the encounter began, Rick hesitated. There was something in Emily's steady gaze and in the way her dogs mirrored her composure that made him pause, if only for a second. But his pride wouldn't let him back down. Not yet. And so, with a cocky grin still plastered on his face, He swung his leg over the top of the fence and landed on the other side, stepping onto military grounds. What Rick didn't realize was that he had just crossed a line, one that would soon prove impossible to uncross. Rick's boots hit the ground with a thud as he landed on the wrong side of the fence, his grin widening as if he'd just won some invisible contest. His gang cheered louder, their voices echoing across the open field like a pack of rowdy hyenas. "Yeah, Rick. Show him who's boss," one of them shouted, pumping his fist in the air. Another added, "Teach that soldier a lesson." Their encouragement only fueled Rick's arrogance, and he swaggered forward, each step bringing him closer to Emily and her dogs. Emily didn't move an inch. Her stance remained steady, her shoulders squared, and her eyes locked onto Rick's every movement. She wasn't intimidated by his size or his bluster. She'd faced far more dangerous situations in her line of work. What concerned her was the unpredictability of someone who thought they were untouchable. People like Rick often underestimated the consequences of their actions until it was too late. And today, Rick was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Titan and Shadow, sensing the shift in tension, began to react more noticeably. Titan's hackles rose slightly, and his tail stiffened, while Shadow let out another low growl, this time louder and more deliberate. The sound carried through the air, sharp enough to make even the most confident person think twice. But Rick either didn't hear it or chose to ignore it, his focus entirely on proving himself to his friends. He took another step forward, pointing at Emily with a smirk. "You hear that, sweetheart?" he taunted, his voice dripping with mockery. "Your dog doesn't sound so tough now, does it? Maybe you should have stuck to desk duty instead of playing soldier." His words hung in the air, heavy with condescension. But Emily didn't flinch. Instead, she raised her hand slightly, palm facing outward, signaling for Titan and Shadow to stay put. The gesture was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it spoke volumes about the level of control she had over her companions. Rick noticed the movement and laughed, clearly amused. "Oh, come on," he said, waving his arms dramatically. "You really think those mutts scare me? I've seen bigger threats in my sleep." To emphasize his point, he took another bold step forward, closing the distance between them. Now he was just a few feet away from Emily, close enough to see the determination in her eyes and the warning in the posture of her dogs. Emily finally spoke, her voice firm and commanding. "Sir, I'm giving you one final warning. Step back now, or there will be consequences." Her tone left no room for negotiation. It was the kind of voice that could cut through chaos, the kind soldiers used when they meant business. But Rick wasn't listening. In fact, he seemed emboldened by her seriousness, mistaking her calm demeanor for weakness. "Consequences," he sneered, leaning closer. "What are you gonna do, huh? Cry for help? Call your mommy?" His gang erupted into laughter again, their jeers filling the air. Rick turned briefly to bask in their approval before turning back to Emily, his grin widening. "I'll tell you what. I'll give you 5 seconds to show me what these glorified puppies can do. After that, I'm walking right past you." Emily's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond verbally. Instead, she shifted her weight slightly, angling herself protectively in front of Titan and Shadow. Her fingers twitched near the leashes, ready to act if necessary. Behind her, the dogs mirrored her movements, their bodies coiled like springs, every muscle taut with anticipation. They weren't growling anymore. They were silent, which made them all the more menacing. Anyone familiar with military K9s would know that silence was a sign of readiness, a prelude to action. Rick, however, misinterpreted the quiet. He straightened up, crossing his arms smugly. "See, nothing but a couple of scared dogs and a girl pretending to be tough." He glanced back at his friends, seeking validation, but something in their expressions had changed. A few of them looked uneasy, shifting uncomfortably on their feet. One man scratched the back of his neck, avoiding eye contact altogether. Even they could sense that the situation was spiraling out of control. But Rick was too far gone to notice. With a cocky shrug, he took one last step forward, planting himself squarely in front of Emily. "All right, lady," he said, spreading his arms wide. "Let's see what you've got. Bring it on." In that moment, Emily realized there was no reasoning with him. Some people only understood lessons the hard way, and Rick was about to get a crash course in respect. As the sound of the bikers' motorcycles faded into the distance, the atmosphere around Emily and her dogs began to shift. The tension that had gripped the air just moments ago slowly dissipated, replaced by a sense of calm and quiet triumph. Emily stood still for a moment, watching the cloud of dust settle on the road where the gang had disappeared. Her chest rose and fell steadily, her breathing controlled and even. She wasn't one to revel in victory, but there was a small, satisfied smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Titan and Shadow, sensing that the immediate threat was over, relaxed their stances. Their growls softened into low whines, and they turned their attention back to Emily, seeking reassurance after the intense encounter. Emily knelt down, running her hands gently over their heads and scratching behind their ears. "You two were amazing," she said softly, her voice filled with pride. "I knew I could count on you." The dogs responded with wagging tails and affectionate nudges, their bond with her stronger than ever. Despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins, Emily took a moment to process what had just happened. She wasn't angry. She rarely let emotions like anger take hold, but she couldn't help feeling a pang of frustration. These kinds of encounters weren't uncommon for her. Over the years, she'd faced plenty of people who doubted her abilities simply because she was a woman or underestimated the power of her canine partners. But every time it happened, it served as a reminder of why she did what she did. Moments like this weren't just about proving others wrong. They were about showing the world that strength came in many forms. Emily's thoughts were interrupted by the distant hum of an approaching vehicle. She glanced up to see a military jeep pulling onto the scene, its tires crunching against the gravel path. Behind the wheel was Lieutenant Harris, one of her commanding officers. He slowed the vehicle to a stop beside her and stepped out, his brow furrowed with concern. "Carter, we heard some commotion out here," he said, scanning the area. "Everything all right?" Emily straightened up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yes, sir," she replied calmly. "A group of civilians trespassed near the perimeter, but the situation has been resolved. No harm done." Lieutenant Harris nodded, though his expression remained serious. "Good work keeping things under control. You handled it exactly as you should have." His gaze shifted to Titan and Shadow, who were now sitting obediently by Emily's side. "These two never disappoint, do they?" "No, sir," Emily said with a faint smile. "They're the best partners anyone could ask for." The lieutenant gave her an approving nod before glancing toward the road where the bikers had fled. "Still, incidents like this need to be reported. We'll make sure security is tightened around this section of the fence. Can't have outsiders thinking they can waltz onto military property whenever they feel like it." "Yes, sir," Emily replied. "I'll file the report as soon as I'm back at the base." With that, Lieutenant Harris climbed back into the jeep and drove off, leaving Emily alone once again with Titan and Shadow. As she watched the jeep disappear down the path, she felt a wave of gratitude, not just for her dogs, but for the support system she had within her unit. While not everyone understood the challenges she faced as a female handler, her superiors and fellow soldiers respected her dedication and skill. That respect meant everything to her. Deciding it was time to wrap up the patrol, Emily signaled to Titan and Shadow to follow her. The three resumed their walk along the perimeter, the rhythmic crunch of gravel beneath their feet providing a soothing backdrop. For Emily, these quiet moments were precious. They allowed her to reflect on the day's events without distraction, to appreciate the harmony between herself and her dogs. Even after years of working together, she marveled at how seamlessly they communicated, how a single glance or gesture could convey so much. As they walked, Emily thought about the bikers and wondered if they would learn anything from the encounter. Would Rick think twice before mocking someone else? Would his friends realize that their reckless behavior could have ended much worse? She hoped so, though she knew not everyone learned from their mistakes. All she could do was focus on her own responsibilities and continue doing her job with integrity and professionalism. By the time they reached the end of the patrol route, the sun had begun its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The warmth of the day lingered in the air, mingling with the cool breeze that signaled the approach of evening. Emily paused for a moment, taking in the beauty of the horizon. Beside her, Titan and Shadow sat patiently, their loyalty unwavering. For Emily, this was more than just a job. It was a calling. The days that followed the encounter with the bikers passed quietly, almost uneventfully, but Emily noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere around the base. There was a renewed sense of respect, not just for her, but for the entire K-9 unit. Soldiers who had previously seemed indifferent to the work of the handlers now greeted them warmly, asking questions about their training routines or complimenting the discipline of the dogs. Even some of the higher-ranking officers stopped by more frequently to observe drills, clearly impressed by the precision and focus displayed by teams like Emily's. For Emily, this change wasn't about personal recognition. It was about understanding. She hoped that people were beginning to see the value of the bond between handler and dog, the countless hours of training, and the trust required to make such partnerships succeed. It wasn't just about having strong, capable animals. It was about creating a relationship built on mutual reliance and unwavering loyalty. Every command Titan and Shadow obeyed. Every challenge they faced together reinforced that connection. And now, others were starting to appreciate it too. One afternoon, as Emily led Titan and Shadow through an obstacle course designed to test their agility and responsiveness, she overheard two recruits discussing the incident with the bikers. "Did you hear how calm she stayed the whole time?" One of them said, his voice filled with admiration. "Even when those guys were yelling and climbing the fence, she didn't lose her cool for a second." The other recruit nodded eagerly. "Yeah, and the way those dogs moved, it was like they could read her mind. I've never seen anything like it." Emily smiled to herself but didn't interrupt. Instead, she focused on guiding Titan and Shadow through the course, calling out commands in her steady, clear voice. The dogs responded instantly, weaving between poles, leaping over hurdles, and scaling ramps without hesitation. Their movements were fluid, almost effortless, a testament to years of practice and dedication. Watching them work together was like watching poetry in motion, each step perfectly synchronized, each action deliberate and precise. After completing the course, Emily gave the dogs a moment to rest, letting them drink water and stretch their legs. As she knelt beside them, stroking their fur and offering quiet words of praise, she thought about the lessons she'd learned from moments like these. Handling military dogs wasn't just about teaching them skills. It was about patience, consistency, and trust. You couldn't force a dog to obey. You had to earn their cooperation. And in return, they gave you everything they had: unwavering loyalty, boundless energy, and a willingness to protect you at all costs. Later that evening, as she walked back to her quarters, Emily reflected on the bigger picture. The biker's mockery might have been intended to intimidate her, but instead, it had strengthened her resolve. It reminded her why she chose this path, to prove that strength comes in many forms, not just brute force or arrogance. True power lay in preparation, teamwork, and the ability to stay composed under pressure. Those qualities were what set soldiers apart, whether they carried rifles or leashes. As she settled into bed that night, Emily replayed the events once more, not out of pride, but to remind herself of the importance of staying grounded. Life as a K-9 handler wasn't always glamorous or easy, but it was deeply rewarding. Each day brought new challenges, new opportunities to grow, and new ways to strengthen the bond she shared with Titan and Shadow. Together, they formed a team unlike any other, a perfect blend of human intelligence and canine instinct. In the days that followed, rumors spread outside the base about the fearless female handler and her formidable dogs. Locals whispered about the incident, warning troublemakers to steer clear of the military grounds. Some even joked that the dogs could probably run laps around anyone foolish enough to trespass. While Emily didn't concern herself with the gossip, she appreciated knowing that her actions had sent a message. The base, and its defenders, were not to be underestimated. As weeks turned into months, life returned to normal for Emily and her dogs. They continued their patrols, their training sessions, and their quiet moments together, building memories that would last a lifetime. For Emily, there was no greater reward than knowing she had made a difference, not just in protecting her country, but in inspiring those around her. And so, the story of the bikers who mocked a soldier only to be humbled by her dogs became a legend within the base, a reminder that true strength lies not in size or noise, but in discipline, partnership, and the unbreakable bond between a handler and her loyal companions. The sun dipped lower in the sky as Emily and her dogs made their way back to the base, the golden light casting long shadows across the gravel path. The quiet of the evening was a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded just an hour earlier. Emily's mind replayed the events, not out of anger or frustration, but with a sense of clarity. She knew confrontations like this were inevitable. People often misjudged her because of her size, gender, or the perceived gentleness of her dogs. But every encounter was also an opportunity to remind herself why she loved her job. The chance to prove that strength wasn't about appearances. It was about preparation, trust, and resolve. As they approached the main gate of the base, a small crowd began to gather near the entrance. Word traveled fast in such a close-knit community, and it seemed the story of the bikers' humiliation had already spread. Soldiers who had been finishing their shifts or heading to the mess hall stopped what they were doing to catch a glimpse of Emily and her K9 partners. Some clapped softly as she passed, while others offered nods of respect. A few even called out words of encouragement. "Way to show them, Sergeant," one young private shouted, grinning widely. Another added, "Those dogs are incredible. I wouldn't want to mess with them, or you." Emily acknowledged their praise with a polite smile and a slight nod, though she didn't stop to chat. She wasn't one for attention, preferring to let her actions speak for themselves. Still, the support from her fellow soldiers meant more than she could put into words. It reinforced the bond she shared with her team, a bond built on mutual respect and admiration. Inside the base, the mood remained lively. As Emily led Titan and Shadow toward the kennels, she noticed a group of handlers gathered near the training field. They waved her over, clearly eager to hear the details of what had happened. Though she preferred to keep things simple, she knew sharing the story would help reinforce the importance of discipline and professionalism when dealing with outsiders. "So, we heard you gave some bikers a lesson they won't forget," said Corporal Daniels, a tall man with a deep voice and a teasing grin. He leaned casually against the fence, his own German shepherd lounging at his feet. "What exactly went down out there?" Emily shrugged, keeping her tone light. "Nothing too exciting. Just a routine patrol that got interrupted by some guys who thought they could test us. Once they realized Titan and Shadow weren't interested in playing games, they decided to leave." Her understated explanation only fueled the curiosity of the others. "Come on, Carter," another handler chimed in, laughing. "Don't hold out on us. We heard those dogs looked ready to tear someone apart." Emily chuckled softly, glancing down at Titan and Shadow, who sat proudly by her side. "They did their job perfectly," she said simply. "That's all that matters." The group laughed, shaking their heads in amazement. Even among seasoned handlers, stories of K9 units standing their ground against threats were always met with awe. These dogs weren't just tools. They were partners, extensions of their handlers' wills. And today, Titan and Shadow had proven once again why they were among the best. After a few minutes of lighthearted banter, Emily excused herself to tend to her dogs. She guided Titan and Shadow into their kennels, ensuring they had fresh water and food after the day's exertion. As she worked, she couldn't help but feel a swell of gratitude, not just for the dogs, but for the life she'd chosen. Being a K9 handler wasn't easy, It required patience, sacrifice, and an unshakable commitment to teamwork. But moments like these reminded her why she wouldn't trade it for anything else. Later that evening, as she walked back to her quarters, Emily reflected on how quickly news traveled within the base. By now, nearly everyone had heard about the bikers' failed attempt to intimidate her. Some versions of the story were exaggerated, of course. Rumors had already started circulating that Titan had nearly bitten off one of the bikers' arms. Emily rolled her eyes at the exaggeration, but didn't bother correcting anyone. Let people believe what they wanted. The truth was enough for her. Before turning in for the night, she stopped by the bulletin board near the recreation center. Someone had pinned up a cartoon sketch of a dog chasing a biker, complete with the caption, "Don't mess with our handlers, or their furry bosses." Emily smiled, shaking her head at the humor. It was a light-hearted reminder that even in the most serious environments, camaraderie and laughter kept morale high. As she finally settled into her bunk, Emily allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Today had been a victory, not just for her, but for everyone who believed in the power of discipline and teamwork. The bikers may have come looking for trouble, but they left with. The moment Rick finished his challenge, Emily's hand moved with precision. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, just a subtle flick of her wrist and a soft command that only Titan and Shadow could understand. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like nothing more than a casual motion, but for the dogs, it was a signal they had practiced thousands of times. Instantly, their demeanor changed. Titan, who had been standing quietly by Emily's side, sprang into action. In one fluid movement, he lunged forward, stopping mere inches from Rick's legs. His teeth were bared, gleaming white against his dark muzzle, and a deep, guttural growl rumbled from his chest. The sound was primal, almost otherworldly, sending a shiver down Rick's spine despite his bravado. For the first time since climbing the fence, Rick froze, his cocky grin faltering as he stared into the dog's piercing eyes. Shadow wasn't far behind. She circled around Rick with calculated steps, her movements deliberate and predatory. Her golden-brown coat shimmered in the sunlight as she positioned herself behind him, cutting off any chance of retreat. Her lips curled back slightly, revealing sharp teeth, and her low growl joined Titan's, creating a symphony of warning that echoed through the air. Together, the two dogs formed an impenetrable barrier, their teamwork flawless. Rick's bravado crumbled under the weight of their presence. He stumbled backward, his boots scraping against the gravel as he tried to put distance between himself and the snarling canines. "Deluwo, okay," he stammered, raising his hands defensively. "Easy, easy. I was just messing around." But his voice wavered, betraying the fear bubbling beneath his tough exterior. His earlier confidence was gone, replaced by wide-eyed panic. Emily stood tall, her expression calm but unwavering. She didn't raise her voice or make a scene. She didn't need to. With a single word, she commanded Titan and Shadow to hold their positions. The dogs obeyed instantly, freezing in place but keeping their intense gazes locked on Rick. Their bodies were taut, ready to strike if provoked further. Yet they remained perfectly controlled, a testament to years of rigorous training. "Sir," Emily said firmly, her tone icy but composed, "you are trespassing on restricted military property. These dogs are trained to protect this area, and me, at all costs. If you value your safety, I suggest you back away slowly and return to where you came from." Her words carried authority, each syllable measured and deliberate. There was no room for argument, no hint of leniency. She wasn't asking. She was telling. Rick swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly as he nodded nervously. Yeah. Okay," he muttered, taking small, cautious steps backward. His eyes darted between Titan and Shadow, unable to focus on anything else. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run, but he knew better than to turn his back on animals like these. One wrong move, and he'd be on the ground before he could blink. Behind him, his gang had gone eerily quiet. The laughter and cheers had died away, replaced by stunned silence. A few of them shifted uncomfortably on their motorcycles, glancing at each other with wide eyes. One man even started the engine of his bike, clearly preparing to flee at a moment's notice. They had expected a harmless prank, a bit of fun at the expense of a lone soldier and her dogs. What they hadn't anticipated was the raw power and discipline displayed by both Emily and her K9 companions. As Rick continued to retreat, his movements clumsy and awkward, Emily kept her focus sharp. She didn't relax her guard, not even for a second. Her hand hovered near Titan's leash, ready to intervene if necessary, but she trusted her dogs implicitly. They were extensions of her will, finely tuned instruments of protection and control. And right now, they were doing exactly what they were trained to do: neutralize a threat without causing harm, unless absolutely necessary. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Rick reached the fence. He scrambled over it with none of the swagger he'd shown earlier, his hands trembling as he gripped the chain links. Once on the other side, he turned to face Emily, still trying to salvage some shred of dignity. All right," he said, forcing a weak laugh. "You made your point. We're leaving." Emily didn't respond. She simply watched as Rick hurried back to his motorcycle, his friends quickly following suit. Within moments, the engines roared to life, and the group sped off down the road, kicking up clouds of dust in their wake. The noise faded into the distance, leaving behind an eerie stillness that settled over the field. For a long moment, Emily stood there, her breathing steady and controlled. Titan and Shadow relaxed slightly, their postures shifting from aggressive to alert. Emily knelt down,